as well as the date of December 31st, 2012.
Ms. Barnhill, you have your...
I just advised the help desk and told them to send someone over. I think relatives not great.
While it's not, you're welcome to reposition so you can see it.
Opening the contents that are labeled as your item number 19, what do you recognize this as?
As item 19, the pair of black sweatpants received with the body of Malissa Williams.
In these black pants, they have a yellow tag on it, correct?
Yes.
And is that K?
Yes.
Tell us about item number 20.
Item 20 was a pair of gray, is described as a pair of gray shorts.
Handing you what has been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 94. Do you recognize that?
I do. State's Exhibit 94 is a brown paper bag sealed with tape labeled IN 12-2024, item 20, gray shorts.
And is that bag sealed?
It is, and my initials and the date of December 31st, 2012 appear on the seal.
Showing you the contents of what you have marked as item number 20. Do you recognize these?
Yes, item 20 is the pair of gray shorts received with the body of Malissa Williams.
Okay. And there's also yellow tags on this, correct?
Yes.
And what is that brownish red substance that we see on these shorts?
Apparent blood.
And you say apparent again because you don't test the blood, correct?
Right, there was no chemical testing performed on the stains.
Tell us what item number 21 is.
Item 21 is described as a white cloth belt.
What about item number 22?
Item 22 is described as a white calf-length sock, a white ankle-length sock, a black calf-length sock, and a black ankle-length sock.
And what about item number 23?
Item 23 described as 2 white socks, 1 blue sock, and 1 black sock.
Item number 24.
Item 24 is a right shoe.
Item 25.
Item 25 is a left shoe.
What is item 26?
Item 26 is a black glove that was removed from the right hand of Malissa Williams.
Handing you what has been previously marked as State's Exhibit 100. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And what do you recognize it as?
State's Exhibit 100 is a brown paper bag sealed with tape labeled IN 12-2024, item 26, right glove.
And is that sealed with a signature on the back?
It is. There's 2 seals, with both have my initials. One is dated December 31st of 2012, and the second is dated March 24th of 2015.
Is it dated in March because you did further testing?
I did.
Now, you initially told us that when you received the bodies, Malissa Williams was wearing gloves, correct?
Yes.
And I believe you did some testing on the gloves.
Yeah, gunshot primer residue samples were collected from the gloves.
Okay. Now, this has a yellow tab on it. Do you recognize the tab?
Yes,
Okay. And is that a tab that you put on there?
it is.
What about item number 27?
Item 27 is described as a black glove removed from the left hand of Malissa Williams.
Handing you what's been previously marked as State's Exhibit 101. Do you recognize that?
I do.
What do you recognize that as?
State's Exhibit 101 is a brown paper bag sealed with tape labeled IN 12-2024, item 27, left glove.
And is there a signature on the back?
There is my initials and the date of December 31st, 2012.
So unlike the right glove, you did not do further testing on this left glove.
That's correct.
Showing you the contents of State's Exhibit 101. Do you recognize this?
I do.
And there is also a yellow tab on this glove, correct?
There is.
Can you place that there?
I did.
What about item number 28?
Item 28 is described as a blue wave cap.
A blue
Wave cap.
Wave cap.
wave.
Handing you what has been previously marked, State's Exhibit 102. Do you recognize that?
I do.
What do you recognize it as?
State's Exhibit 102 is a brown paper bag sealed with tape labeled N122024, item 28, blue wave cap.
And is that sealed with initials?
It is. There's two seals. One seal has my initials and the date of December 31st, 2012. The second seal has my initials and the date of March 24th, 2015.
And the March date, is that because you did further testing?
Yes.
You're cutting off the exhibits there.
I'll leave that part out. Thank you, Judge. Showing you the contents of State's Exhibit 102. You described this as a blue wave cap,
Correct.
and you recognize this?
As that item, yes.
Okay. And there's also yellow tabs on this wave cap as well, is that correct?
There is.
Okay, and you place those there?
I did.
Now, Mr. Jones, I want to go through each of the items that we just identified, starting with item number 17, which is a pair of light blue pants. Did you note any defects in your report for these pants?
There were none noted.
Did you note anything in your report for these?
Just apparent blood staining.
So apparent blood stains?
Yes.
What about item number 18?
Again, apparent blood staining observed on the pair of blue jeans, but there were no bullet holes observed.
No bullet holes in the lower part of item 17 or 18. What about item number 19?
For item 19, there was apparent blood staining observed on the item, and there was a bullet hole observed.
And did you label that bullet hole?
I did.
What did you mark it as?
K.
What about item number 20?
For item 20, again, apparent blood staining observed on the item of clothing, and there was an area of multiple bullet holes observed.
You said an area of multiple bullet holes. When we discussed some of the clothing that Melissa was wearing on the upper part of her body, you just marked it with multiple tabs because there were a number of holes. Did you do the same thing here?
Yes, there's actually two K1s on the item, and it's outlining where the multiple holes are located.
As it related to the socks and the shoes that Malissa Williams was wearing that night, did you notice any defects in those?
No.
Let's talk about item number 26.
For item 26, which is the right black glove, there was apparent blood staining noted on the glove. There was also a bullet hole observed on the glove.
I'm sorry.
A bullet hole observed on the glove.
And did you label that bullet hole?
I did.
And what letter did you label it as?
O.
What about item number 27?
For item 27, which is the left black glove, there was apparent blood staining observed on the glove. There was also a bullet hole observed on the glove.
And did you label the bullet hole?
I did.
And what letter did you label that as?
P.
Now let's talk about item number 28. I see a number of yellow tabs on this. Could you explain that to us?
Those yellow arrows are pointing to the locations of bullet defects or bullet holes on the wave cap.
And how many did you place on here?
3.
And what are those labeled as?
Labeled as defect L, defect M, and defect N.
Mr. Jones, I know that part of your job was also to collect any casings or anything that was found on the bodies once you removed the clothes or while you were removing the clothing? Was there any debris or casings that you noted, any bullet fragments collected from Malissa Williams' body?
Yes, there were some bullet fragments collected, and there was debris collected from the body of Melissa Williams also.
Okay. Did you list the number of bullet fragments or debris?
I did not know.
Okay. And when you collect those, what do you do with them?
They were released to the BCI.
Okay.
Ultimately.
So you collect them, do you seal them?
Yes, the bullet fragments are sealed in an envelope or some type of packaging and then released and sealed.
And you said you released them to BCI?
Yes. Well, actually, they were released to the sheriff's office, but I believe they then went to BCI.
Mr. Jones, I want to turn your attention to Timothy Russell. Did you also remove items from Timothy Russell, items of clothing from Timothy Russell?
I did.
You've already informed us of the type of testing that you did both for Melissa and Timothy. Tell us about item number 7 for Timothy Russell. What was that?
Item 7 was a black long-sleeve shirt removed from the body of Timothy Russell.
I'm hearing what has been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 74. Do you recognize that?
I do.
What do you recognize that as?
State's Exhibit 74 is a brown paper bag sealed with tape labeled N122023, item 7, black shirt.
Okay. And is that bag sealed with initials?
It is. It's sealed, 2 seals actually, one with my initials and the date of December 31st, 2012, and then the second seal is my initials and the date of March 24th, 2015.
And is the March date because you did further testing?
Yes.
I'm showing you the contents of State's Exhibit number 74. Do you recognize this?
I do.
What do you recognize it as?
That is the black long-sleeve shirt removed from the body of Timothy Russell.
And looking at this black shirt, there are a number of tabs around the shirt. Did you place those there?
I did.
And there's also what appears to be a dried reddish-brown substance.
Yes.
What do you recognize that as?
Apparent blood.
Tell us about item number 8.
Item 8 was a pair of white pants removed from the body of Timothy Russell.
I'm handing you what has been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 75. Do you recognize that?
I do.
What do you recognize that as?
State's Exhibit 75 is a brown paper bag sealed with tape labeled N122023, item 8, white pants.
Okay. And is that sealed with initials?
Yes, my initials and the date of December 31st, 2012.
Mr. Jones, I'm showing you the contents of State's Exhibit number 75. Do you recognize this?
I do.
And what do you recognize these as?
What appears in the trace report for Timothy Russell is item 8, the pair of white pants removed from the body of Timothy Russell.
And those have yellow tabs on them as well, is that correct?
They do.
And we also see a dried reddish-brown substance. What is that?
Apparent blood.
Tell us about item number 9.
Item 9 is described as a pair of gray and black plaid boxer shorts.
Handing me what has been previously marked as State's Exhibit number 76. Do you recognize it?
I do.
And what do you recognize it as?
States Exhibit 76 is a brown paper bag sealed with tape labeled N12-2023, item 9, blue boxer shorts.
And is that bag sealed with initials?
It is, yes. My initials and the date of December 19th, 2012.
Showing you the contents of States Exhibit 76. Do you recognize that?
I do.
And there's also a dried brownish substance on these boxers. What do you recognize that to be?
Apparent blood.
Tell us about item number 10.
Item 10 was a white sock removed from the body of Timothy Russell.
What about item number 11?
Item 11 was a second white sock removed from the body of Timothy Russell.
Okay. Item number 12.
Item 12 was a right shoe removed from the body of Timothy Russell.
And item number 13.
Item 13 was a left shoe removed from the body of Timothy Russell.
Going back to your item number 7 that you have listed for Timothy Russell, talk to us about these labels that are on here.
The labels are placed to show the location of the bullet hole in the shirt.
Are they all labeled with letters?
No.
Why is that?
There were so many holes in this shirt that labeling them by letter would have been confusing, so I just labeled it with arrows. And there was writing on there that's kind of bled out over time.
Looks like
That's bled away over time. The ink is gone. But they were labeled with anterior, A&T, to show that they're on the front. And then there was a second designation of where on the shirt they were located, so in the close-ups you would know, like upper left, upper right, center, lower center.
we also see some labels on the left hand sleeve in the back.
Yes.
Is that correct? And looking at item number 8, did you put any labels on that?
I did.
Tell us about these labels on item number 8.
The labels on item 8 contain letters. There's an A lower on the left pant leg, left thigh area. There's also an arrow, I believe it's a blank arrow, to show the location of what appeared to be a bullet strike on the item of clothing. And there's 2 arrows that have numbers on them, which are, instead of letters, there's numbers, so that we're showing the location of damage on the fabric of the jeans that then doesn't correspond with injury on the victim's body.
So the numbers you said are showing location of damage on the jeans, but not necessarily corresponding with any injury that you found on the body.
Right, and they may not be bullet holes. That's why they're given numbers instead of letters.
Okay, so letters is what you presume to be bullet holes, and numbers are simply a defect in the clothing,
Right.
which can be caused from anything else.
Right, it could be a bullet, it could be something else, can't tell. And there's usually no injury on the body in that location.
And that's what you had for the pants leg with the 1 and the 2 on there.
That's correct.
But that doesn't apply to the shirt. You think all the holes in the shirt are bullet holes,
Right.
or not yours?
No problem. In the shirt, I believe you said there was a letter on here as well, and then there's anterior.
Right, there's A&T for anterior to indicate the front, and then there was a designation on the arrow that would be like UL for upper left, or UR for upper right, or C for center. So in the close-up photographs, you would know where on the shirt you're looking at.
And on item number 9, I believe you said there were no defects. Is that correct?
For item 9, yes, there were no bullet holes observed on the boxer shorts.
So as it relates to the clothing of Timothy Russell, the only items that you numbered or lettered would have been the shirt, which we just discussed, from bullet holes,
Yes,
and also the pants.
correct.
Now, Mr. Jones, were there any other things that you collected? This is specifically looking at item 14. Was that something that you collected from the vehicle or the body of Timothy Russell?
No.
What is item number 14?
Item 14 was a spent shotgun shell casing that was submitted to the laboratory by the Cleveland Police Department.
Was that submitted to the laboratory on a different date than when you received the bodies of Timothy and Melissa?
Yes, it was submitted on December 3rd of 2012.
And is this something that a detective simply brought into you?
Yes.
Now, were you charged with testing that?
No. Actually, the representative of the DNA unit took a swab from that shotgun shell casing.
Did anything turn up from that swab?
No, it actually wasn't tested. It was released along with the shotgun shell. To the sheriff's office on December 12th of 2012.
But that shell casing that was brought in at a later date by a detective was not something that you found in either the vehicle that was towed to the medical examiner's office or contained within the bodies or clothing of Timothy or Melissa.
That's correct.
You also told us earlier that you removed a C-clamp from the car. What did you do with that?
That was released to the sheriff's office on December 13th of 2012.
And prior to releasing it to the sheriff's office, did you bag it or tag it in any way?
My recollection was that I did put it in a bag and seal it, I believe, before it was released.
I'm handing you what was previously marked as State's Exhibit 72. The signature on the back of this bag, is this yours?
Yes, this is my initials.
Okay. And is there a seal there as well?
There is.
What is the date?
December 12th of 2012.
Showing you the contents. Do you recognize this?
I do.
What do you recognize this as?
The C-clamp that was on the B-pillar of the passenger side of the vehicle that was holding the front passenger door closed.
And I believe you already told us that you could not get into that vehicle without removing this. Is that correct?
The door wouldn't open without removing the C-clamp. That's correct.
As it relates to your initial testing and receiving of the bodies in December, is there anything else that you did that we should take note of?
I believe we went over all the samples collected in terms of what was done on the initial reports, yes.
I want to turn your attention to March 24th, 2015. Handing you what has been previously marked as State's Exhibit 985. Do you recognize this?
I do.
What do you recognize that as?
State's Exhibit 985 is a photograph of the left side of Timothy Russell's head. There's a ruler in the photograph that is above or to the right of a sample of fibers that were sticking out of a wound on his face that were collected and appear in the Timothy Russell report as item 4.
Okay. And when you say the fibers, when we're looking at State's Exhibit 985, on the photo we see a fuzzy white material.
Correct.
Is that what you're referring to as the fibers?
Yes.
And did you do any testing as it relates to those fibers?
I did.
And did you produce a report as it related to that testing?
Yes.
Jones, I'm handing you what has been previously marked as State's Exhibit 1202. Do you recognize that?
I do.
What do you recognize that as?
State's Exhibit 1202 is a copy of a supplemental report for both victims, Timothy Russell and Malissa Williams, consisting of 7 pages. My initials appear on each page, and my signature appears on page 707.
Walk us through the testing that was done on the fibers and how it was retrieved.
The sample was collected prior to the undressing of the body in 2012, and then it initially wasn't tested and packaged and sealed and packaged and kept in our evidence vault until a request was made to test it. What was done was the sample was initially examined under low power magnification, and during that exam,
What type of magnification?
low power.
Explain
low
that
power
to me.
magnification. It's a stereo microscope, so it's low power between up to maybe 40 times X. So it's low power, not like a light microscope that's higher power magnification.
Okay.
And during that exam, what was found was that there were white fibers as well as a small section of intact fabric, blue fabric that had weave present, as well as a piece of blue thread. So each of those samples, the white fibers, the blue fabric, and the blue thread, was then sampled in order to determine the fiber composition and then compare that fiber composition as well as the weave of the little piece of fabric to samples of clothing of both Timothy Russell and Malissa Williams.
Okay, that fiber that was on Timothy's face, was it simply laying on his face or was it embedded in some way?
It was actually embedded in the skin.
Okay, now explain to us how it was embedded in the skin.
It was actually sticking in his skin, and to collect it, it actually pulled out of the skin. The white portion you can see that's not in the skin, but there was a portion of it that was actually embedded in the skin. That when we removed that, it actually came out of what appeared to be a wound on his face.
Okay, so when you say embedded in the skin, which appears to be a wound, was it a hole? The wound, was it like a hole in his face?
Medically, I don't know what you term it, but there was actually a portion of the sample was under the skin of Timothy Williams.
So you had to actually pull it out of his skin.
Right.
Now, tell us how you tested each fiber and what you compared it to.
I then, once I prepared the samples of the unknown, the sample from the victim's face being the unknown, I then collected known samples from items of clothing of both victims that were similar in color, blue or black, would have been outer layers of clothing, or that had fill, stuffing, insulation in the item. So I collected known samples from all of those items of clothing.
Let me stop you there. Which items of clothing did you compare it to with Timothy Russell? I noticed that some of the bags had 2 signatures and 2 dates of March.
Right.
Which items of clothing did you do a second test on for Timothy?
Timothy Russell's shirt, his black shirt.
So it's black shirt.
Right.
What about Malissa Williams?
For Malissa Williams, I took a sample from the lining of the outer layer black coat. It kind of looks like a leather coat.
So the first one, that was her item number 7.
Right. A sample of the insulation, I believe. A sample from the wave cap, the blue wave cap.
Okay.
A sample from the right black glove of Malissa Williams. Right, her outer layer coat, the glove, the wave cap, and then his black shirt.
Now continue with how you compared those once you did the samples.
So then what I did is I cut a little section of fabric from each of those items, or collected a sample of the insulation of the black coat outer layer for Malissa Williams. looked at the weave of the lining of the coat, compared the weave to the section of fabric that was removed from the sample from the face of Timothy Russell. Then mounted microscopically for microscopic exam individual fibers from the lining, from the fabric of each item, as well as took the weave apart and mounted fibers from each direction of the weave to be microscopically compared to the unknown from the victim's face.
Okay. And were you able to tell where that fiber that was embedded in Timothy Russell's face, where it came from?
Yes.
And where did it come from?
It was consistent with originating from the lining and the fill, or the insulation, of the outer layer black coat of Melissa Williams.
And you described it as the coat that looked like it was leather,
Right.
with the filling. So that would have been the first, most outer layer of clothing that Melissa Williams had on, correct?
Yes.
And that fiber that was embedded in Timothy Russell's face came from her coat.
Yes, in terms of thinking about it, the population of items that it could have come from in a car and the victims, though I can't say exactly from that coat because there's not just one coat like that made in the world. But the white fibers, there were actually two different types of fibers from the insulation, as well as the thread from the sample, as well as both directions of the weave of the small piece of fabric from the unknown sample were the same fibers as the lining and the fill of the outer layer coat of Melissa Williams.
One moment, Your Honor.
Did you find those fabrics at the margins of a bullet hole?
I don't know what type of injury that was. You'd have to ask the pathologist.
Are you talking more on the sort of the back of the cheek here?
Right. It's actually kind of where it's darker, circled around. That's kind of where the injury was, and the white fibers kind of trail out from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is nothing, right? This is
Right.
Thank you, and pardon me, Ms. Richter.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Jones, if there were urine or any type of liquid on the clothing, would you do any testing for that?
Probably not, no.
It's kind of like the blood. If you visually see it, you would presume what it is, but not necessarily test it.
No, not necessarily. Not under these case circumstances tested, no.
Thank you. Nothing further at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Royster. Do you have any cross-exam, Mr. Shaughnessy?
I do, thank you, Judge.
I don't know how long you need. You'll be given as long as you reasonably need, but just an alert. We'll break at 10:15 for a short break.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
How you doing today?
Good.
You and I have spoken on many occasions, correct?
We have.
We've spoken about this case, correct?
Yes.
I met with you out at the medical examiner's office,
Yes.
and we discussed some of the principles and testing and results that you testified to here both yesterday and today, correct?
Yes.
And I think you told us yesterday you've testified how many times?
Over 200 times.
And for those over 200 times, you and I have probably talked about many of those same issues maybe 20 times, correct?
I would say that's a good estimate.
And probably, I'm hard-pressed to find a time when we disagree. Would you agree with that?
That's probably accurate.
If we did, I can't recall it. Can you?
No, I can't.
All right. I'd like to talk to you about a couple of areas. And the first one is trace metal detection.
Okay.
Okay? And the purpose of trace metal detection is to see if a person's skin or a person's article of clothing, whether it be a shirt or a coat or a glove, come into contact with certain metals, correct?
Yes.
And there's a word for those metals?
Yes, ferrous metals.
Ferrous metals, correct?
Yes.
And can you give the court example or examples of what ferrous metals are?
Iron-containing metals, typically iron, of course, or steel.
Okay. Would a C-clamp, such as in State's Exhibit, I don't see a number on it, 72, would that be a ferrous metal?
Most likely, yes.
And may I approach witness here?
Sure.
A C-clamp has Well, that's a C, right?
Yes,
Okay, so looking at the C part, would that be a ferrous metal?
I believe it to be, yes.
And then what would you call the thing that goes through the C?
It's probably a ferrous metal as well, but it might be coated in some way.
Okay. But the C clamp would probably be a ferrous metal,
Right,
and the bolt, if you will, for lack of a better term, would also be a ferrous metal, but it may be coated in a material that would prevent it from reacting?
right, but prevent it from probably rusting, maybe a chrome of some kind.
Would the metal coating have any impact on trace metal detection testing?
It can.
So the test is designed to see, first of all, if a human being with their skin has touched a ferrous metal, correct?
Yes,
And that could be a wrench, a C-clamp, a knife, a gun,
yes,
any one of those items, as long as they contain that specific type of metal.
correct.
Okay. And you can take that one step further and you can test fabric, such as gloves, for the same thing.
You can, yes.
Now let's talk about the skin first. And you put a qualifier in your report, correct?
I do.
Okay. First thing is, not everybody reacts, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So I could hold this C-clamp all day long, and you could tell me it's a ferrous metal, and I may or may not react, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you could do that in a laboratory and take everybody in the room, have them all hold a ferrous metal for a sufficient period of time, correct?
Yes,
Such that some of us would react and some of us would not.
that's correct.
Okay. Do you have a percentage on who reacts and who doesn't?
No,
But it's such that we can't say that the absence of reacting means that somebody did not touch a ferrous metal.
that's correct.
Okay. And again, you could watch me do it. I could hold it for hours, clench it as hard as I could, and I still might not react.
It's a possibility, yes.
Okay. Now with clothing, the type of clothing has an impact on whether or not it reacts to a ferrous metal?
Maybe in terms of, it may speak more to the ability of the metal to transfer from the item to the item.
Would the absorbency of the material play an impact in that?
I don't know. I don't know if it would or not. It would be maybe twofold in a way. The condition of the fabric, whether it was conducive to transfer, if it was wet or dry, and then the item itself, whether it was exposed metal, rusty, if it was conducive to causing transfer also.
Okay. So once again, I could put on a glove, I could hold a C-clamp or some other ferrous metal, you could watch me do it, then we can take that glove back to your lab, and you may or may not get a reaction.
That's true.
And the lack of reaction is not indicative that I did not hold that ferrous metal.
That's true.
Now let's talk about the objects that are ferrous metal. We already mentioned things such as the C-clamp, correct?
Yes.
And by the way, just to jump ahead, Timothy Russell was negative under the trace metal detection test,
He was.
and the gloves of Malissa Williams were negative, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so your testing revealed that in a laboratory sense, neither Mr. Russell's hands nor Ms. Williams' gloves had touched a ferrous metal.
Well, that's one of the conclusions that can be reached. There was no reaction.
Okay. No reaction, correct?
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that they didn't do it as we've just demonstrated with the C-clamp and our examples, correct?
That's right, yes.
Now, when we talk about transferability, you indicated some things factor into that, rust.
Right. If the metal's corroded, it could be a better transfer than a non-rusty object.
So something that's newer or smoother or kept out of the elements may not transfer as well as something that's rusty or old or corroded.
That's right.
Does the length of time that one touches the ferrous metal impact whether or not it transfers?
It can.
Does the frequency of touching, is that a factor?
It could.
Now, we've talked about C-clamps and knives and tire irons, things such as that. Those could all be possible sources of transfer, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And now let's talk about firearms briefly. A firearm could be an item that would transfer to the trace metal detection test, correct?
Could be, yes.
That's not a negative finding on the trace metal detection test. Bless you. Is not dispositive that somebody did not touch a firearm.
That's correct.
And that could be for many reasons, correct?
Yes.
Including, first of all, obviously, the type of firearm,
Right.
the amount of ferrous metal contained on the firearm.
Right. If there's any exposed, the condition of that metal.
Okay. And you're not a firearms expert, are you?
I'm not.
Neither am I. But many firearms are made with composite or polymer type, I guess, are there plastic handles?
Right. A lot of firearms today are produced with plastic polymer handles that don't have any exposed metal.
Okay. Rubber handles?
Right. Either produced that way or aftermarket rubberized covers for grips.
Okay. So many firearms do not contain exposed ferrous metals.
Some don't, yes.
Some. Do you have a percentage on that?
I don't.
So if I touched or held one of those, or even went to the shooting range with one of those firearms that did not have exposed ferrous metals, I could shoot all day. If I'm a reactor, I wouldn't show a trace metal detection possible.
Right. If there's no metal to transfer, then there's going to be no reaction.
So some people react and some don't.
Yes.
Some ferrous metals transfer and some don't.
Yes.
And or some transfer better.
Right.
And some firearms are designed without any exposed ferrous metals.
Correct.
So you do the test, right?
Yes.
And I guess if you get a positive, then the test has more value, correct?
It does. And it should be noted that the real value of that test, the trace metal detection test, is when there is a reaction, and then that reaction can be associated, the pattern of that reaction could be associated to an object.
Right. So, if the pattern was such that it was holding a crowbar or a tire iron, or the pattern was such that it was holding a firearm, correct?
Right.
Okay. So, the test has a lot of value if there's a positive.
Yes, and then that reaction could be associated to an object. Could have very.
But a negative doesn't answer the question, it just leaves more possibilities open.
Right. The negative reaction fulfills a bunch of different conclusions that can be reached.
Okay. And again, that person may or may not be a reactor.
Yes.
The surface that was touched may or may not be conducive to transfer.
Yes.
And taking a step further to a firearm, that firearm may not have had exposed ferrous metals.
Correct.
If Mr. Russell had recently touched the C-clamp and held it, and then you tested him shortly thereafter, and you didn't get a reaction, would that lead you to believe he's a non-reactor?
Maybe not. I don't know. It would depend. That C-clamp looks like it might have a coating on it too,
Okay.
so that could interfere. There are some rusty spots, but it looks like it might be coated as well.
So again, we're just left with another question.
Right. If he touched it, there's no way I can know without a reaction. That could be then associated to the C-clamp surface.
Right. If, for example, you did this with the C-clamp and we're using it, manipulating the bolt, and then you did by hand and you found a pattern consistent with that C-clamp, then you could conclude I touched the C-clamp.
Right. If a pattern was then observed of maybe a couple of straight lines, maybe one across the palm, one across the fingers, that would be suggestive of a surface like the C-clamp.
Okay.
Tire iron or pipe or something.
Let's talk about gunshot residue, okay?
Okay.
First of all, we kind of lump two different discharges into gunshot residue. Would that be correct?
Yes.
You do a gunshot residue test where you swab the hands of somebody, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I believe, if I'm correct, you take 4 swabs, right?
Only 2, actually.
Two? Tops of each hand?
Well, one for each hand. We do the back and palm of each hand on one sample.
I guess I jumped ahead. Somebody has 2 hands, you do 4 samples. top and bottom of each hand?
One sample for each hand. And that one sample includes both the back and the palm of one hand.
Okay. Guess I'm saying it wrong. You test 4 surfaces.
Correct.
When I say 4 tests, I should have said 4 surfaces, right?
Yes.
Okay, so you take one swab of the top, call this the top,
Right, the back.
the palm, and then the back of the hand, correct?
Yes.
And that's one swab for the left hand.
Correct.
And you take another swab for the right hand, top and palm, correct?
Yes.
Back and palm, correct?
Yes.
All right. And then you test both of those.
Yes.
And the reason you do one swab is because you want to collect and cover as much surface as you can, right?
Right. It's really concentrated. These particles, gunshot primer residue, are microscopic in nature, so I want to concentrate down as much surface area onto the testing device as possible.
Okay. Now let's talk about what comes out of the back of the gun first, okay?
Okay.
Now, when a firearm is discharged, the projectile is expelled, there's a reaction there when the hammer hits, the firing pin hits the casing, right?
Yes.
Okay. And are you an expert in that?
Yes.
Good. And there's a little explosion, right?
Yeah, it causes it to burn, and then the primer that ignites the gunpowder.
Okay. And then what comes out of the back of the gun after it's been fired that would rest or fall upon somebody's hands who either just fired that or was in very close proximity to it?
That's gunshot primer residue, and it's
Okay.
not just the back of the gun. It would escape through gaps in the weapon. There would be some projected out the end of the barrel as well, but
Okay.
it would escape through gaps in the weapon and settle on surfaces near the gun.
So, when the weapon fires, any gaps that aren't contained, some of that primer residue is going to come out.
Right.
And that can fall or deposit on the hands of somebody who's fired a gun.
Correct.
Or it could fall or deposit on the hands of somebody who has been in very close proximity to a firearm being discharged.
Yes.
Okay. And what are those materials?
They're actual particles that then would contain either 3 elements or 2 elements. Those elements being lead, barium, and antimony.
Okay.
These particles will then contain all 3 of those, or a combination of 2 of those 3.
Okay. So, when the firearm is discharged, those particles and elements come out of the back of the gun in any opening where they can escape.
Right. The act of shooting the gun actually forms these particles that then escape through gaps in the weapon.
And that's what you're swabbing the hands for, to see if those are found on those surfaces.
Right.
Okay. Now, we go to the front of the barrel where the projectile comes out. Okay?
Yes.
And you talked with Ms. Royster about this yesterday. The pellet or the bullet comes out of the barrel of the gun, right?
Yes.
The muzzle.
Yes.
And what particles follow out of the muzzle?
There can be fouling, which is totally burned gunpowder.
Okay.
There could be, the technical term is nitrites, but it's partially burned and burned gunpowder.
Okay.
And then you can also have unburned gunpowder, which can be expelled along with the projectile and the other residues.
Okay. And now you spoke to Ms. Royster about that, and I believe you indicated to her that the particles, the residue, the components, the gases that you're looking for when you test the surface go out about how far?
Well, it depends. The different residues will go at different distances.
Okay.
The fouling, which is the totally combusted gunpowder, the totally burned gunpowder, doesn't travel as far as the other items. Typically, with handguns, there's a generalization, a foot or less.
Okay. So the fouling is going to go 1 foot or less, correct?
Right, when talking about handguns.
Handguns. Okay. And what would be the next component?
The next component would then be both the unburned powder grains as well as the partially burned or burned gunpowder grains.
Okay, so unburnt and burnt powder grains. And how far are they going? Without something in between, without
Right.
an intermediary source.
Generalized, in terms of handguns, powder grains can be projected out to 4 or 5 feet, potentially. But they will, within that distance, they'll form patterns. So you'll see a pattern that tends to be, at closer distances, smaller in diameter and heavier in population. And then as that distance increases, that pattern becomes larger in diameter and less populated in particles, to a point that then there's maybe a few random ones here and there, and then beyond that, there is nothing.
Would that phenomenon be like taking a flashlight against a dark wall and pulling it out? The farther out you go, the wider the spectrum gets?
Yes, it's a good example.
Okay, thanks. So the closer you go, the more concentrated and tight they would be, and the farther out you go, it would be a wider sphere or specter, right?
Right, almost like a cone inserted in the barrel of the gun, and the cone extends outwards, and the farther that cone gets away, the larger that diameter of the cone is.
And when I get to, with a handgun, 4 to 5 feet, there's not enough velocity behind these things, they fall off.
Right, they don't have enough energy now to reach the target, so you tend to get less in population in terms of particles, and then maybe a random one here and there, and then beyond the 4 to 5 feet or so, it becomes nothing.
4 to 5 feet or so, it becomes nothing. You want me to stop here, Judge?
I do, thank you. I was writing and I didn't notice that the time had passed. Sir, you remain under oath, as you know, and you have to come back at 10:30, but you're welcome to step down now, and we'll go back on the record at 10:30. Thank you.